She said it so casually over dinner, between bites of pasta. "I'm going on a self-discovery trip with Eric for 2 weeks." Eric, her ex of 5 years. The fork froze halfway to my mouth as her words registered. Self-discovery. With the man she once planned to marry. I watched myself from somewhere outside my body. How I carefully set down my utensils. How I took a measured sip of water. How my voice remained steady when I finally spoke. "Tell me more about that." Something shifted in that moment. A quiet awakening beneath the shock. This wasn't about their trip anymore. This was about me. About what I would accept in the name of love. About whether I would continue disappearing to accommodate others' journeys. The question wasn't whether she would go. The question was, who would I be when she returned? We had been together for 18 months, long enough to establish routines, to finish each other's sentences, to know which side of the bed belonged to whom. Allison was spontaneous, where I was methodical, outspoken, where I was reflective. We balanced each other. At least that's what I told myself. There had been small moments that should have registered. How she maintained close contact with Eric despite their amicable breakup 3 years ago. How she'd text him late at night about life questions. How she'd mention his perspectives in our disagreements. I'd ignored these things, believing that maturity meant accepting your partner's past relationships without jealousy. Our apartment was filled with photos of our adventures, hiking in Colorado, weekends at the coast, the music festival where we'd danced until sunrise. I believed we were building something real, something that would last. That evening, after her casual dinner announcement about the trip with Eric, I moved through our apartment like a stranger. Everything looked the same, but felt different. On the bookshelf, the framed photo from New Year's Eve caught my attention. Allison's smile seemed directed beyond the camera. I picked it up, noticing for the first time her phone in her hand, screen visible with Eric's name at the top of a text thread. I set the photo down and continued my inventory of our shared life, touching objects as if to confirm their reality. The coffee mugs we'd bought in Portland. The throw blanket her mother had given us last Christmas. The spare key to her car that I kept on my keychain. In the desk drawer, I found a receipt I didn't recognize. Dinner for 2 at Bellini's, a restaurant she'd never mentioned visiting. The date, 3 weeks ago, when she told me she was working late. 2 entrees, 2 desserts, 2 glasses of Prosecco. The dinner where she announced her trip had been meant to celebrate my promotion. I'd made her favorite, linguine with clam sauce, and bought a bottle of wine we couldn't really afford. I wanted to discuss our future, moving to a bigger place, maybe even a timeline for engagement. "I've been meaning to tell you," she said, refilling her wine glass. "Eric and I have been talking about taking a trip together. It's not romantic," she added quickly, reading my expression. "It's about self-discovery. We both feel like we're at crossroads in our lives." The details spilled out between bites. 2 weeks in Bali, sharing accommodations to save money. They'd be attending meditation retreats and exploring ancient temples. She spoke with animation I hadn't seen in months, her eyes bright with anticipation. "We've already booked the flights. We leave in 3 weeks. Not, would this be okay? Not, how do you feel about this?" It was already decided. "I didn't tell you sooner because I knew you'd overthink it," she explained. "It's important for my growth. You're always talking about how we should support each other's dreams." I set my fork down carefully, struggling to align the woman across from me with the partner I thought I knew. The pasta congealed on my plate as I asked questions with a calmness I didn't feel. "When did you plan this?" "We've been talking about it for a while." Vague, non-committal. "Will you be sharing a room?" She sighed, twisting a strand of hair around her finger. "Don't make this weird. This is exactly why I hesitated to tell you. Eric and I have a connection that's hard to explain. We're like spiritual siblings. There's nothing for you to worry about." The waiter delivered the check, glancing awkwardly between us, perhaps sensing the tension crackling beneath our polite facades. "I need some air," I said finally, standing up from our half-eaten meal. On the balcony of our sixth-floor apartment, I watched the city lights blur through tears I refused to acknowledge. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "How did the dinner go? Did you talk about the future?" I couldn't bring myself to respond. Was I overreacting? In college, a girlfriend had accused me of being controlling when I expressed discomfort about her close friendship with an ex. I'd carried that label with me, determined never to be that person again. I'd prided myself on being understanding, accommodating, evolved about Allison's ongoing friendship with Eric. But this felt different. 2 weeks in Bali wasn't a coffee catch-up or occasional text. This was intentional intimacy disguised as spiritual growth. I scrolled through our recent photos, looking for signs I might have missed. There were fewer of them in recent months. Her smile seemed different in the latest ones, more distant, less present. When I returned to the dining room, Allison was clearing the table, her movements brisk. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is," she said without looking up. "I'm not asking your permission. I'm sharing my plans with you." "Would you be okay with me taking a 2-week trip with Madison?" I asked, referring to my ex-girlfriend. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's completely different." "How?" "Eric and I have history. We understand each other in ways no one else does." "That's exactly what worries me." She sighed, exasperated. "I thought you were different. I thought you weren't the jealous type." That word, jealous, hit like a slap. Was that all this was? Simple jealousy? Or was it the rational response to a boundary being crossed? "I'm not trying to control you," I said carefully. "I'm trying to understand why my girlfriend wants to spend 2 weeks with her ex in a romantic location, sharing accommodations without discussing it with me first." Her eyes narrowed. "If you can't support my journey, maybe that tells us something important about our relationship." A cold weight settled in my stomach. The foundation of everything I thought we were building had just cracked open beneath my feet. The week following her announcement was filled with tense silences and surface conversations. I moved through work on autopilot, unable to focus on the promotion I'd been so excited about days earlier. During lunch with a colleague, I mentioned Allison's upcoming trip, trying to sound casual. "With her ex?" Jeremy's eyebrows shot up. "For 2 weeks? And you're okay with that?" His reaction validated the unease I'd been questioning in myself. Was I really the unreasonable one? "She says it's about self-discovery," I explained, hearing how hollow the words sounded. Jeremy set down his sandwich. "Look, I don't know Allison well, but if Diane told me she was going to Bali with her ex for self-discovery, I'd have some serious questions." His straightforward response was oddly comforting after days of doubting my own instincts. That evening, while Allison was at yoga, I did something I'd never done before. I looked at her laptop that she'd left open. The betrayal I felt at her trip plans eclipsed any guilt about this invasion of privacy. Their email exchanges about the trip went back 3 months, long before she'd mentioned anything to me. They had booked a villa with a single bedroom, not separate accommodations as she'd implied. Worse were the messages. "This time together is exactly what we need," Eric had written. "We can figure out if there's still something real between us." Her reply had been equally disturbing. I need to know if leaving was the right choice. These 2 weeks will give us clarity. My hand shook as I closed the laptop. This wasn't about self-discovery. This was about rekindling a relationship, or at least exploring the possibility, while keeping me as a safety net. I heard her key in the door. Decision time. When Allison returned, flushed and peaceful from her yoga class, I was sitting in the dark living room. "We need to talk," I said, turning on the lamp. She sighed, dropping her yoga mat by the door. "If this is about the trip again, I saw your emails with Eric." Her expression shifted from annoyance to outrage. "You went through my computer? How dare you invade my privacy like that?" "How dare I? You've been planning to use this trip to explore getting back together with your ex while stringing me along as a backup plan." "That's not what's happening," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You told him you need to know if leaving him was the right choice. What am I supposed to think that means?" She paced the living room, suddenly defensive. "You're taking things out of context. Eric and I have a complicated history." "Stop," I interrupted. "Just stop lying. If you want to explore getting back with your ex, that's your choice. But don't pretend this is about self-discovery or spiritual growth." "You don't understand," she said, tears forming. "I'm confused. I need space to figure things out." "Then be honest about it. Don't package it as something noble when it's just about your unresolved feelings." "This is exactly why I didn't tell you sooner," she said, voice rising. "You're being controlling and making me feel guilty for taking care of my emotional needs." The accusation hit its mark. Was I being controlling? Was I standing in the way of her legitimate journey? "If you need to explore things with Eric, that's your right," I said finally. "But I won't be waiting here while you do it." Her expression changed, softened. She sat beside me on the couch, taking my hand. "I love you. You know that, right? This trip isn't about leaving you. It's about making sure I'm not carrying baggage into our future." I wanted desperately to believe her. The next day, I called my sister Kate. "She's gaslighting you," Kate said bluntly after hearing the story. "This trip is completely inappropriate, and she knows it. That's why she's making you feel crazy for having a normal reaction." Despite Kate's certainty, doubts plagued me. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this really was just about closure and personal growth. I mentioned the situation to a few friends, receiving mixed reactions. Some were outraged on my behalf. Others suggested I was being possessive. "Relationships look different for everyone," said my friend Miguel. "Maybe they really do just have a special friendship." My parents, conservative in their views on relationships, were clear. "If she respects you, she wouldn't put you in this position," my father said. I felt increasingly isolated in my confusion. Was I clinging to outdated ideas about relationships? Was I failing to support Allison's authentic needs? Or was I simply being manipulated by someone unwilling to make a clean break? That weekend we attended a dinner party with friends. Someone asked about our summer plans, and Allison enthusiastically described her upcoming Bali trip, without mentioning Eric. When our friend Ryan asked who she was traveling with, she hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "An old friend," she said vaguely. "We've been planning it forever." The omission felt like a public rejection. If the trip was so innocent, why hide who she was going with? I excused myself to the bathroom, where I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. The person looking back seemed diminished somehow, less substantial. On the ride home, when I asked why she hadn't mentioned Eric, she exploded. "I don't need to justify my friendships to our friends. Why are you so obsessed with controlling who I spend time with?" I fell silent. the accusation of being controlling once again shutting down my ability to express legitimate concerns. That night, I slept on the couch, wondering if I even knew who either of us was anymore. 3 days before her departure, Allison came home with my favorite takeout and a conciliatory smile. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began, as we sat at the kitchen counter. "I understand why this trip makes you uncomfortable, and I should have been more transparent about the planning." Relief washed over me. Finally, we were having a real conversation. "I've made some changes to the arrangements," she continued. "I've booked my own room at each place we're staying, and I've scheduled video calls with you throughout the trip, so you'll feel included." She reached across the counter to take my hand. "The last thing I want is to hurt you. This trip is important for my personal growth, but our relationship matters more." Her eyes held mine, sincere and warm, the Allison I had fallen in love with. "When I come back, I think we should talk about our future together. Maybe even start looking at rings." The mention of rings, of marriage, caught me off guard. It was what I had wanted, what I had planned to discuss the night she announced her trip. "Are you serious?" I asked. "Completely." She squeezed my hand. "This trip will help me close that chapter of my life for good. Then we can start writing our own story, the real one." We stayed up late talking, more openly than we had in months. She admitted she should have discussed the trip with me before booking it. I acknowledged my insecurities about her history with Eric. By the time we went to bed, the tension of the past weeks had dissolved into tentative hope. The next 2 days were reminiscent of our early relationship. Allison texted throughout the day. Heart emojis, inside jokes, plans for when she returned. We made love with an intensity that had been missing for months. She asked me to help her pack, including me in the process, rather than shutting me out. "I'm thinking when I get back, we could look at that apartment building you liked in Riverdale," she said, as I helped her fold summer dresses, "the one with the rooftop garden." I allowed myself to believe that the trip might actually strengthen our relationship. Perhaps the distance would clarify her feelings, confirm that what we had was worth building upon. The night before her departure, we had dinner with my sister Kate and her husband. Kate had been skeptical about the trip and Allison's intentions, but even she seemed won over by Allison's obvious affection toward me throughout the evening. "Maybe I was wrong," Kate whispered when Allison went to the restroom. "She seems genuinely committed to you." I drove Allison to the airport the next morning, my anxiety tempered by her constant reassurance. At the security checkpoint, she kissed me deeply. 16 days, she said. Then the rest of our lives. I watched her disappear into the crowd, feeling more secure than I had since she first mentioned the trip. That afternoon, I even began researching engagement rings online. 3 days into her trip, the video calls she'd promised hadn't materialized. Her texts were sporadic and generic, a temple at sunset, a plate of exotic food, nothing personal or intimate. When I asked about her accommodations, she was vague. When I suggested a specific time for a video call, she claimed the Wi-Fi was unreliable. On the 5th day, an Instagram notification appeared on my phone. Eric J. Murray tagged Allison Reed in a post. The photo showed them on a beach at sunset, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. The caption read, "Some connections transcend time and distance. Grateful for second chances. #soulmates, #ballymagic. My hands shook so badly I dropped the phone. When I picked it up, there were already comments from friends. "You guys are adorable together," and "always knew you two would find your way back to each other." I called Allison immediately. No answer. I texted, "I saw Eric's Instagram post. Please call me." 3 agonizing hours later, she responded with a text. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Eric and I have realized we still have feelings for each other. I was going to tell you when I got back. I never meant to hurt you." The carefully constructed future we'd discussed just days ago collapsed like a house of cards. There had never been separate accommodations. The talk of engagement had been a temporary salve to ease her guilt. The promises of building a life together, all lies to facilitate a smooth departure. I sat alone in our apartment, her plants, her books, her presence still everywhere, and felt a devastation beyond anything I'd experienced before. This wasn't just the loss of a relationship. This was the systematic dismantling of trust, dignity, and self-worth. I stared at her final text for what felt like hours. "Never meant to hurt you." The words seemed almost comical in their inadequacy. How could someone plan deception for months, fabricate a reconciliation, discuss marriage, and then claim they never intended harm? The worst part wasn't even losing Allison. It was the realization that the person I thought I knew, the woman I had planned to marry, had never really existed. The Allison I loved was a carefully crafted illusion, designed to meet my expectations while serving her needs. I walked through the apartment, touching the objects we'd shared, the coffee mugs, the throw blanket, the framed photos, and wondered how many other moments had been performances rather than genuine connection. The Instagram comments continued to appear on my phone. Friends who didn't know we were still together. Friends who thought I was ancient history. The public nature of the betrayal added humiliation to heartbreak. As night fell, I sat in darkness, the blue light of my phone illuminating the walls with each new notification. I turned it off finally, unable to bear any more evidence of the life Allison was building while mine lay in ruins around me. The days following Allison's text blurred together. I moved mechanically through work, declining concerned questions from colleagues. At night, I scrolled through social media, torturing myself with more photos of Allison and Eric, on beaches, at temples, looking blissful and in love. A week after her revelation, I received an email from her. "I'll be staying in Bali for another month with Eric. I've arranged for my friend Jess to pick up some of my things from the apartment. I'll get the rest when I return. I'm sorry things ended this way." Another month. She'd be living with him in paradise while I sorted through the wreckage of our shared life. When Jess arrived to collect Allison's belongings, her discomfort was palpable. "I didn't know about Eric until they were already there," she offered awkwardly. I don't think she planned for this to happen. "Did she tell you about the separate accommodations she supposedly booked? About the engagement we discussed the night before she left?" My voice was bitter even to my own ears. Jess looked away. "The thing is, she and Eric had been talking about getting back together for months. She wasn't sure how to end things with you because you share the apartment and you've been so good to her." The revelation hit like a physical blow. "Months?" Jess nodded miserably. "Since around Christmas. The trip was always about seeing if they could make it work again. I told her she should be honest with you, but she was afraid of hurting you before she was sure about Eric. 6 months of deception, half a year of planning her exit while maintaining our relationship. The night before she left, the talk of engagement, of our future, had been the cruelest manipulation of all. I refused to lie for her, Jess added quietly. She wanted me to tell everyone they reconnected spontaneously in Bali. I couldn't do that. I felt an unexpected flash of gratitude toward this woman who barely knew me but had chosen honesty over loyalty to her friend. Our shared friends began taking sides. Some reached out with sympathy. Others went silent, their allegiance clearly with Allison and her romantic reunion narrative. Social media became a minefield of painful updates from their extended Bali stay. The apartment that had once felt like home became unlivable, haunted by memories and unanswered questions. I couldn't sleep in our bed. I couldn't sit on the couch where we talked about marriage. I couldn't cook in the kitchen where she'd assured me of her love days before betraying it. I started staying at Kate's place, sleeping on her pull-out couch, ignoring her worried glances. My performance at work suffered enough that my boss called me in for a conversation. "Whatever's going on in your personal life is affecting your work," she said kindly but firmly. "The promotion we gave you comes with expectations." The promotion, the original cause for celebration the night Allison announced her trip, now seemed meaningless. I nodded mutely, promising to do better, but the motivation that had once driven my career had evaporated. Financial reality soon set in. I couldn't afford our apartment alone, but breaking the lease would cost thousands I didn't have. Allison's casual email about getting the rest when I return offered no timeline, no plan for her financial responsibilities. When I finally gathered the courage to ask directly about the lease and our shared expenses, her response was brief. "I can't contribute anymore since I'm not living there. You'll need to figure something out." The injustice of it all, her deception, her abandonment, her shirking of responsibilities, compounded the emotional devastation. I had lost not just my relationship, but my home, many of my friends, my professional momentum, and my financial stability. "You need to talk to a lawyer," Kate said one evening, after finding me staring blankly at apartment listings I couldn't afford. "She can't just walk away from a lease you both signed." It was the first practical suggestion that had penetrated my fog of despair. Late one night, alone in the apartment I could no longer afford, surrounded by half-packed boxes and Allison's remaining possessions, I hit bottom. The pain had become physical, a constant pressure in my chest, a hollowness that food couldn't fill, exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure. I drafted an email to Allison, fingers shaking with rage and grief. "You've taken everything. My trust, my home, my future. You planned your escape for months while looking me in the eye and talking about our life together. You made me believe I was paranoid for questioning your innocent trip. The night before you left, you discussed engagement knowing you were leaving me for him. What kind of person does that?" I continued, pouring out all the rage and hurt, the accusations and insults that had been building. I detailed every lie she'd told, every manipulation she'd employed. I threatened to tell everyone the truth about her calculated deception. My finger hovered over the send button. It would feel good, momentarily, to lash out, to make her feel a fraction of the pain she'd caused, to shatter the perfect narrative she'd created about reconnecting with her soulmate. But as I reread the venomous words, I saw a version of myself I didn't recognize, bitter, vindictive, consumed by pain. Sending this email wouldn't restore what I'd lost. It would only cement my transformation into someone defined by betrayal. I deleted the draft and closed my laptop. In the quiet darkness of the apartment, I faced the choice that defines such moments: become what hurt you or find a different path forward. Let this betrayal determine who I would become, or use it as painful but necessary guidance towards something better. I had lost Allison. I had lost the future we'd planned. But I hadn't yet lost myself, though I was dangerously close to the edge of that final, most devastating loss. The morning after my darkest night, I woke on the couch to sunlight streaming through windows I'd left uncovered. For the first time in weeks, my mind felt clear, as if the toxicity of anger had finally drained away, leaving room for something else. I made coffee and carried it to the small balcony, watching the city come alive below. A memory surfaced. My grandfather, after my grandmother's death, telling me, "The measure of a life isn't in what happens to you, but in how you respond to it." The truth crystallized with sudden clarity. Allison's behavior revealed everything about her character and nothing about my worth. Her ability to sustain deception, to manipulate my feelings to ease her exit, these were her failings, not evidence of my inadequacy. The pain remained, but something shifted in how I carried it. This betrayal wasn't something that happened because I was lacking or unworthy. It happened because I had loved someone who wasn't capable of the honesty and respect that love requires. I returned to the half-packed living room with new purpose. Instead of sorting possessions with resentment, I began making deliberate choices about what I wanted to keep in my life and what I needed to release. The apartment we'd shared would never feel like home again, but that didn't mean I couldn't create a new home, one built on my own terms. For the first time since seeing that Instagram post, I felt a flicker of gratitude beneath the pain. Gratitude that I'd discovered the truth before deeper commitments had been made, before marriage, before children, before decades invested in someone capable of such calculated deception. That afternoon, I finally returned the calls and messages from friends I'd been avoiding. To my surprise, many had seen through Allison's carefully crafted narrative. "What she did was cowardly," said my friend Ryan over coffee. "Planning her exit for months instead of having an honest conversation. That's not about self-discovery, that's about avoiding accountability." My colleague Jeremy invited me to join his basketball league. "Twice a week, guaranteed time when you won't be thinking about her," he promised. Most unexpectedly, Allison's friend Jess reached out again. "I've been thinking about what happened," she said, when we met at a park. "Allison asked me to tell mutual friends that Eric was a last-minute addition to the trip. She wanted me to help maintain the story that it was all spontaneous." "And?" I asked, not sure why she was telling me this. "I refused," Jess said firmly. "I told her I wouldn't lie for her. That's why we're not speaking anymore." She hesitated. "I've known Allison since college. This isn't the first time she's done something like this. There's a pattern of her creating exit strategies before she's honest about wanting to leave." The information didn't lessen the pain, but it reinforced what I'd begun to understand. This was about Allison's character flaws, not my inadequacies. Most significantly, my sister Kate helped me face the practical challenges. "Move in with us until you figure out next steps," she insisted. "The lease issue isn't worth your mental health." When I protested that I'd be imposing, her husband Mark intervened. "Family shows up. Period. Besides, our kid thinks you're way cooler than we are." Their generous offer, practical support wrapped in love, cracked something open in me. For weeks, I'd been trying to handle everything alone, as if asking for help would confirm my failure. Now, surrounded by people who saw my worth even when I couldn't, I began to understand that accepting support wasn't weakness, but wisdom. With a temporary living situation secured at Kate's, I could approach the remaining challenges strategically rather than reactively. I consulted a lawyer about the lease. "You have options," she explained. "Your ex can't simply abandon her financial obligations because she's chosen to extend her stay abroad." Armed with legal clarity, I sent Allison a factual, unemotional email outlining her responsibilities and the consequences of failing to meet them. No accusations, no emotional appeals, just clear information about her legal obligations. Her response came within hours: agreement to cover her portion of the rent until the lease ended, or the apartment was relet. Next, I met with a financial advisor to rebuild the savings that had been depleted during my weeks of turmoil. Think of this as a fresh start financially, he suggested. A chance to establish priorities based on your values, not shared compromises. At work, I scheduled a meeting with my boss. I've been dealing with a personal crisis, I acknowledged. It affected my performance, but I've turned a corner. I'd like to present a plan for getting back on track. Rather than dismissing my struggles, she appreciated my honesty. Take the support you need, she said. The promotion was based on your talent and potential, both of which are still there. Most importantly, I began seeing a therapist specializing in relationship betrayal. What you're experiencing has elements of trauma, Dr. Chen explained in our first session. The deception creates a crisis of trust, not just in the person who betrayed you, but in your own judgment. In our sessions, patterns emerged. My tendency to accommodate others at my own expense, my reluctance to assert boundaries for fear of being labeled controlling, my habit of taking responsibility for others' behavior. These aren't character flaws, Dr. Chen emphasized. They're adaptations that may have served you in the past, but are no longer helping you build healthy relationships. With each intentional step, legal, financial, professional, emotional, I moved from reactive survival to strategic rebuilding. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it no longer dictated my decisions. I was creating a framework for moving forward that honored the lessons of this experience without being defined by it. For the first time in months, I looked toward the future with something resembling hope. Not the naive optimism I'd once had, but something more grounded and resilient. A hope tempered by difficulty, but stronger for having been tested. 3 months after Allison's departure, my life had taken a shape entirely my own. I'd found a smaller apartment in a neighborhood I'd always loved, but Allison had dismissed as too far from everything. The space reflected my preferences. Minimalist furnishings, bookshelves lining one wall, a desk positioned near windows that captured morning light. My work had not only recovered, but thrived. The project I'd been promoted to lead was ahead of schedule, earning recognition from senior management. The focus I'd redirected from my crumbling relationship into professional growth had yielded unexpected opportunities. Physically, I'd changed as well. The basketball league with Jeremy had become a cornerstone of my weekly routine. The combination of exercise, camaraderie, and competitive play provided both stress relief and a sense of accomplishment entirely separate from work or relationships. Most significantly, my sessions with Dr. Chen had helped me recognize the patterns that had made me vulnerable to Allison's manipulation. You value loyalty so highly that you extended it even when it wasn't being reciprocated, she observed. And your fear of being perceived as controlling led you to silence your legitimate concerns. These insights didn't erase the pain of betrayal, but they transformed it from a source of shame to a catalyst for growth. I began practicing setting boundaries in small ways, declining invitations that didn't align with my priorities, expressing preferences without apology, allowing myself to take up space in conversations and relationships. The changes weren't just internal. Friends commented on the difference. You seem more present, Ryan noted. More confident in your opinions. My sister was more direct. I like this version of you better. You're not constantly adjusting yourself to make room for someone else's drama. Even my relationship with my parents evolved as I practiced more authentic communication. Rather than deflecting their concerns or telling them what they wanted to hear, I began sharing my actual experiences, including the painful lessons from Allison's betrayal. I always worried she wasn't good enough for you. my mother admitted. But I thought saying so would only push you closer to her. I needed to learn that lesson myself, I replied, surprised by my lack of defensiveness. And maybe now I'll recognize the warning signs sooner. The calm I'd cultivated was tested when Allison finally returned from Bali, without Eric. She texted asking to meet for coffee to talk about some things. Against the advice of several friends, I agreed, curious about what she could possibly want to discuss. The woman who slid into the seat across from me looked both familiar and strange, tanned from the Balinese sun, but somehow diminished, less vibrant than in my memories. "You look good," she said after an awkward greeting. "Really good." "Thanks. How was the extended stay?" A shadow crossed her face. "That's partly why I wanted to talk. Things with Eric didn't work out. We realized after a few weeks that we're different people now. The connection we thought was still there was really just nostalgia." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I've been thinking a lot about us," she said, leaning forward, "about how good we were together, how much simpler everything was." The implication was clear, and for a brief, disorienting moment, I felt the pull of the familiar, the possibility of returning to something known, of filling the lingering emptiness her departure had created. "I made mistakes," she continued, when I didn't respond. "I handled everything badly. But I've grown from the experience. I know now what I really want." "And what's that?" I asked, my voice steady. "Another chance with you." She reached for my hand across the table. "We could start fresh. I'm moving back to the city next month." I gently withdrew my hand. "Allison, you didn't make mistakes. You made choices, deliberate choices over many months. You lied to me repeatedly, manipulated my feelings, and abandoned our relationship and your responsibilities when it was convenient." Her expression hardened. "So that's it? People aren't allowed to realize they made a wrong choice, to try to fix things?" "You're allowed whatever you want," I replied, "but so am I. And what I want is a relationship built on respect and honesty from the beginning, not as an afterthought when other options didn't work out." Allison's attempt at reconciliation wasn't the only test of my newfound boundaries. As word spread of her return without Eric, mutual friends began suggesting that I consider giving her another chance. "Everyone deserves forgiveness," said Miguel over dinner, "and it takes courage to admit when you've made a mistake." "I have forgiven her," I explained. "Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the betrayal never happened or putting myself in position to experience it again." My mother, surprisingly, was more direct. "Sometimes relationships need to go through difficulties to become stronger. Your father and I certainly had our challenges." "There's a difference between working through challenges together and having someone systematically deceive you," I replied. "One builds strength, the other destroys trust." The most difficult conversation came from Allison herself, who continued reaching out despite my clear lack of interest in reconciliation. Her texts escalated from friendly to pleading to accusatory. "You're punishing me for being honest about needing space to figure things out," she wrote. "That's not fair." After days of similar messages, I finally called her. "I need to be very clear," I said when she answered. "I've moved on. I wish you well, but I'm not interested in trying again. Please respect that decision." "You're being cruel," she replied, her voice breaking. "After everything we shared, you won't even consider giving us another chance?" For a moment, the old guilt surfaced, the fear of being seen as unforgiving, rigid, or cold. The urge to accommodate her feelings at the expense of my own well-being was powerful. But in that hesitation, I remembered Dr. Chen's words. Boundaries aren't about punishing others. They're about protecting yourself and communicating your needs clearly. This isn't about punishment, I said firmly. It's about making choices that honor what I've learned and what I need. I deserve a relationship where trust doesn't have to be rebuilt from complete destruction. So do you. But it won't be with each other. She began to argue, but I held firm. This conversation is over, Allison. I wish you healing and growth, but I need you to respect my decision. Please don't contact me again. After ending the call, I expected to feel guilt or doubt. Instead, I felt an unfamiliar lightness. The weight of trying to manage her emotions and expectations finally lifted from my shoulders. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had prioritized my own emotional health without qualification or apology. That evening, I met Kate and Mark for dinner. When I told them about Allison's attempts at reconciliation and my response, Kate raised her glass. "To boundaries," she toasted. "May they protect us from those who don't respect them." Looking back at the person I was when Allison first mentioned her self-discovery trip, I barely recognize him. So eager to accommodate, so afraid of appearing controlling, so willing to silence his own instincts to maintain peace. The journey from that man to the person I am now wasn't one I would have chosen, but it gave me gifts I might never have found on an easier path. I learned that boundaries aren't selfish. They're the foundation of genuine connection. Real love doesn't require diminishing yourself to prove your worth. Trust your inner knowing when something feels wrong, even when others try to convince you that you're overreacting. And perhaps most importantly, betrayal reveals character, both the betrayer's and your own, in how you respond to it. These lessons aren't just about romantic relationships. They apply to friendships, family connections, professional interactions, anywhere we engage with others while trying to maintain our authentic selves. The balance is delicate and always evolving. How to remain open without becoming vulnerable to those who don't deserve access to our inner worlds. How to forgive without inviting repeated harm. How to learn from pain without becoming defined by it. If you're in the darkness I once knew, feeling lost in betrayal's aftermath, questioning your worth, your judgment, your future, know this. The very experience breaking your heart is also giving you an opportunity to rebuild it stronger, wiser, more discerning. The pain is real and shouldn't be minimized. But it isn't the end of your story. It's the difficult middle, the transformation point that leads to a more authentic life. Trust that the person you're becoming through this crucible is exactly the person you need to be, not just to protect yourself from future harm, but to create connections of genuine depth and meaning when you're ready to try again.